Ruined fortresses, half-buried monuments, and eerie hints of vanished people. History's full of mysterious cultures that blinked out and left us holding only fragments of their stories. Some mastered epic engineering, others soared on booming trade, yet every last one collapsed into silent rubble. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Cucuteni Trypillians. There is something unsettling about colossal prehistoric towns that once teemed with people, only to end up as deserted ruins under the earth. The Cucuteni Trypillians emerged around 4800 BC in what is now Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania, building some of the largest Neolithic settlements in Europe. Evidence suggests their population might have grown to tens of thousands in single megasites, an unheard of figure for that period. They created sophisticated pottery with swirling, almost hypnotic designs, and raised vast communal structures meant to protect both people and livestock. Then, sometime before 3000 BC, everything changed. Many of these elaborate settlements were burned or simply left behind, leaving behind precious few clues as to why. Some blame climate change and resource depletion, others talk of invasions or internal turmoil. All that remains are eerie house rings, decorated pottery shards, and unanswered questions about how such a vibrant culture could vanish so completely. In our number 9 spot today, we have Mycenaean Greece. Towering fortress palaces, gold masks fit for gods, and epic tales that inspired the legends of the Trojan War, Mycenaean Greece had all the hallmarks of a mighty civilization. From around 1700 to 1050 BC, the Mycenaeans constructed massive citadels like Messenia, Tiryns, and Pylos, forging an advanced bureaucracy, intricate art, and a far-reaching trade network that touched Egypt and the Near East. Yet, around 1200 BC, their fortified cities came crashing down in a wave of destruction scholars still can't fully explain. Some blame brutal invasions by mysterious sea peoples, while others point to famine, internal strife, or natural disasters. What's chilling is how these fearsome palace states crumbled into disorganized communities seemingly overnight. Their once proud palaces, famed in Homer's epics, became haunted ruins, and Greece slid into a dark age where even writing seemed to disappear for centuries. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Nuragic Civilization. Strange, tower-like strongholds built with giant stones scattered across the rugged Sardinian landscape. These are the Nuragi, the only real proof left of the mysterious Nuragic people. Flourishing between 1800 and 500 BC, the Nuragic civilization left behind thousands of cyclopean stone towers, some towering 5 stories high, along with elaborate villages hidden inland. They were masters of bronze working and seafaring, exporting goods across the Mediterranean. But even with trade ties stretching from Iberia to the Aegean Sea, their society waned under the pressure of the Carthaginian and then Roman dominance. It's almost as if their monumental architecture grew silent, overshadowed by new conquerors. To this day, no written records tell their tale. Only the stark silhouettes of those mighty towers stand as sentinels to a once thriving people swallowed by time. Next, we are talking about the Aksumite Empire. High in the Ethiopian highlands, Aksum grew into a powerful empire that controlled trade routes linking Rome, Arabia, and even distant Asian kingdoms. Beginning around the 1st century CE, its capital boasted towering stelae, massive carved obelisks, alongside palatial architecture that screamed wealth and sophistication. Aksum was among the first African states to mint its own coins, and its rulers adopted Christianity around the 4th century, making it a beacon of faith in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet by the 8th century, this proud empire had all but faded. Some blame resource depletion and soil exhaustion. Others point to shifting trade routes following the rise of Islamic powers controlling the Red Sea. Whatever the cause, Aksum Buddhism's grand monuments and cryptic inscriptions endure as monuments to a once glorious kingdom that abruptly lost its hold on history. Next, we are talking about Tartessos. Buried somewhere beneath southern Spain's marshy lands lies the ghost of Tartessos, a kingdom so wealthy it was sometimes compared to the fabled Atlantis by ancient writers. Archaeologists say the Tartessians thrived from around 1100 to 600 BC, dominating the trade in precious metals like silver and tin. Their advanced metallurgy and rumored stockpiles of gold drew merchants from across the Mediterranean: Phoenicians, Greeks, you name it. Oddly, around the 6th century BC, Tartessos vanished from historical records as if it had never even existed, leaving behind a handful of artifacts and faint echoes of myths. Scholars have suggested everything from ecological catastrophe to conquest by Carthage, yet tangible proof remains elusive. Today, with every newly excavated site and new piece of ancient metalware, the riddle of Tartessos grows even more haunting, a once glorious kingdom swallowed by the shifting sands. Next, we are talking about the Guanches. Off the coast of North Africa, the Spanish Canary Islands once belonged to the Guanches, a mysterious people who likely arrived thousands of years ago. They herded goats, cultivated fields, and mummified their dead, keeping a culture that seemed cut off from the rest of the world. Then, in the 15th century, the Spanish arrived. In a shockingly swift campaign, they conquered the islands, and disease and warfare nearly erased the Guanches. Today, only a few caves with mummified remains, bizarre rock art, and faint linguistic echoes survive. It is definitely a haunting cautionary tale, an entire indigenous civilization gone in just a few generations, leaving the Canaries' volcanic landscape dotted with silent tombs. Next, we are talking about the Ba people. Ancient China's Ba people once flourished across the eastern Sichuan and western Hubei provinces, carving out a name for their fearless warriors and powerful chieftains. They appear in records dating back to the Shang dynasty, but their capital's exact location remains uncertain. Some say it's in the gorges of the Yangtze River, others believe it shifted with each new generation of Ba kings. Archaeologists occasionally unearth tombs filled with intriguing bronzes and savage war relics, painting a culture that valued martial skill above all else. By around 316 BC, the Ba had vanished, conquered by expanding states, or possibly undone by internal strife. Nearly 2,000 years of history drifted into obscurity, leaving behind glimpses of an epic tradition of valor and a confounding question: where did these formidable warriors go? Next, we are talking about the kingdom of Tijuana. Squeezed between the mighty Phrygians in the west and the Assyrian Empire in the east, Tijuana, also known as Tyana, held a crucial trade route in ancient Anatolia. Once part of the Hittite domain, it later emerged as a small yet powerful Neo-Hittite kingdom. Kings like Warpalas appear in inscriptions paying tribute to the Assyrians while juggling uneasy alliances. Tijuana linked east and west not just in trade, but in the flow of culture. Scholars even suspected the Phoenician alphabet may have traveled to Greece through its territory. Then, in a blink, Tijuana drops out of the historical narrative, replaced by new rulers and overshadowed by bigger empires. Its mysterious disappearance still fascinates archaeologists digging through the remnants of city walls and stelae marked with half-erased scripts. Next, we are talking about the Vinca culture. During Europe's Neolithic age, the Vinca civilization in the Danube region built some of the continent's biggest prehistoric settlements. Spanning parts of modern Serbia, Romania, and beyond, from about 5,400 to 4,500 BC, they created a wealth of dark burnished pottery and intriguing figurines that might be connected to ancient rituals. They even experimented with early copper smelting, a technology unheard of for the era. For unknown reasons, their once thriving mega villages collapsed, replaced by smaller communities, or simply abandoned. Some blame overworked land and resource competition, while others suggest major social turmoil. The Vinca people left behind cryptic symbols that many see as a precursor to writing, little ciphers hinting at beliefs that we can't fully grasp. And finally on our list today we have the Indus Valley Civilization. In the plains of what is now Pakistan and northwest India, the Indus Valley Civilization rose around 3300 BC and built advanced urban centers like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, replete with grid-like streets, complex drainage systems, and standardized weights. For centuries, these thriving river cities traded widely, possibly as far as Mesopotamia. Then, between 1900 and 1700 BC, they dwindled, with entire sites abandoned. The reasons are still hotly debated. Was it a shift in river courses, prolonged drought, or an invasion? There's almost nothing in the way of decipherable text to explain. Despite countless excavations, their story ends in silence. Their once orderly streets turned to dust, and their script an unsolved riddle that archaeologists still scramble to decode.
At one time, the Vinca civilization was one of the largest prehistoric cultures in Europe. They were around for about 1500 years. From about 5500 BCE to 4000 BC. They were in parts of what is now Serbia and Romania. The civilization is named after the village of Vinca and the Danube River, where some of the biggest archaeological discoveries were made in the 20th century. The Vinca people had advanced metalworking skills, especially when it came to copper. They excavated the earliest known mine in Europe, and they actually may have been the first civilization in the world to work with copper. These people didn't have a fully developed writing system, but archaeologists have found examples of proto-writing, symbols and marks that don't form a language necessarily, but may have been used as a kind of early form of communication. Their society was also quite organized. Their homes were carefully planned with designated areas for waste disposal. They've also found children's toys during excavations like animal figures and rattles. The Zapotec civilization, ever heard of them? They're usually overshadowed by the more famous Aztecs and Maya, but they were one of the earliest cultures in Mesoamerica. They were pioneers when it came to agriculture and developed one of the first writing systems in the region. Their biggest city was Monte Alban, built around the 5th century BCE. It was around for around 1200 years and at its peak housed around 25,000 people. The ruling class was made up of priests, warriors, and artists overseeing the lower classes, and they subjugated nearby areas, assimilating them into their civilization. What caused their decline? It's not entirely clear. Monte Alban was mostly left intact when the civilization began to fade, so it doesn't seem like there was a catastrophic event that caused the downfall. Could have been economic trouble, which caused people to up and look for work in other places. Eventually, the remaining groups split up into other city-states, which started to compete against each other, which led to the end of their culture altogether. The Hittites. These were an ancient Anatolian civilization that came about around the 2nd millennium BCE in what is now modern-day Turkey. They formed a powerful empire, reaching their peak in the mid-14th century BCE under a king named Suppiluliuma I. At the time, they controlled a large territory that included much of Anatolia and parts of northern Syria. For centuries, the Hittites were only known about through references in other cultures, mainly because their civilization had collapsed by the end of the 12th century BCE. The remnants of their empire was lost to time, and it wasn't until the 19th century that physical evidence of them was rediscovered. In 1834, a French scholar by the name of Charles Texier found what would later be known as the Hittite ruins. At the time, he didn't recognize how significant they were. In the late 1800s, though, archaeological findings at sites like Koltepe revealed trade records mentioning the land of Hatti. Then in 1906, archaeologist Hugo Winkler uncovered over 10,000 clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, one of the oldest known forms of writing. And these tablets revealed tons of stuff about the Hittite Empire and how it was governed, their culture, and their language. The Nabateans were an Arab civilization that lived in northern Arabia and the southern Levant. Their most famous city, Petra, is in modern-day Jordan and was a major trading hub that connected a number of trade routes across the region. The Nabateans lived between the 4th and 2nd centuries BCE and built a kingdom centered around trade, becoming pretty wealthy and influential. They were very independent, able to fend off several attempts by empires including the Romans to control them, but in 106 CE, Emperor Trajan annexed their kingdom into the Roman Empire. The Nabateans still managed to preserve a large part of their culture though, which included finely crafted ceramics and very distinctive architecture, like the rock-cut buildings found in Petra. Their history dates back to at least 312 BCE, when they were first mentioned in battle reports. As they expanded, they gained control over key territories, including Damascus. Petra became quite the city, home to around 20,000 people at its height. Over time, the Nabateans adopted Greek as the dominant language, and by the 5th century, many of them had converted to Christianity. The civilization's decline began with the rise of new Arab groups, and eventually, Nabatean culture dissipated. The Clovis People. These were an ancient group that lived in North America around 13,000 years ago. They are known for their stone tools, especially their fluted projectile points called Clovis points. The Clovers were some of the earliest known human inhabitants in North America. In 1929, a 19-year-old named Ridgely Whiteman discovered a Clovis site near Blackwater Draw in New Mexico. The site contains stone tools along with the remains of mammoths, which was evidence that there was human activity during the Pleistocene era. Before this, another big discovery happened in 1927 at the Folsom site, where the remains of a now extinct bison species were found alongside human-made tools. This was the first definitive evidence of humans in the Americas during that period. Excavations at Blackwater Draw revealed thousands of artifacts over several years, confirming the existence of a culture that relied heavily on hunting large game like mammoths. The Clovis people were highly mobile hunter-gatherers, but their culture didn't last forever. As the megafauna began to dwindle, so did the way of life for the Clovis people. That, along with the extinction of mammoths, which they may have relied heavily on for food. Çatalhöyük is a Neolithic settlement in Turkey that dates back around 7500 BC. It was rediscovered in the late 50s by James Mallart, who found these layers of buildings. Excavations showed that the settlement consisted of tightly packed mud brick houses, and there were no streets. So how did the people get around? Well, they moved around on the rooftops. Suffice to say, the architecture is fascinating and incredibly unique. Houses were accessed through holes in the ceiling, and there were no clear public buildings. They also found a ton of artifacts, from everyday tools to murals depicting hunting scenes and even human figures. People also buried their dead underneath their homes, and I briefly mentioned this before, but another really cool thing about this society was that there were no grand buildings or signs of a ruling class at all. It seems like social status was relatively equal among everyone. The people at Çatalhöyük were also into agriculture, growing grains like wheat and barley, while also hunting and gathering. The Olmecs were one of the earliest and most influential civilizations in Mesoamerica. They started to form around 1400 to 1200 BCE, but more recent discoveries may push them back even further, to about 16 to 15 BCE, thanks to findings at a site called El Manati. The Olmecs are believed to have evolved from early farming cultures in the Tabasco region, dating back as far as 5100 BCE. Their first major center was San Lorenzo. Tenochtitlan, the region's fertile land, and the Coatzacoalcos River helped support a pretty sizable population, leading to the rise of an elite class that demanded fancier goods. And the elites traded for materials like jade and obsidian found in far-off places, which means they had a trade network across Mesoamerica. As time went on, San Lorenzo eventually fell apart around 900 BCE. La Venta then took the spotlight. From 900 BCE until about 400 BCE, La Venta was home to the Great Pyramid, the Mesoamerican version, of course, the largest structure in Mesoamerica at the time, which still stands today. The Olmec civilization is most famous for their massive stone heads, believed to be portraits of their rulers. Each head is unique and is adorned with distinctive headdresses. The Khmer Empire was a powerful civilization in Southeast Asia that lasted from 802 CE to 1431, thereabouts. It stretched across present-day Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and parts of Vietnam. This empire was this blend of Buddhist and Hindu cultures, which came about after centuries of conflict. The Khmer are also best known for their incredible architecture, particularly the temples of Angkor, which are still some of the most impressive monuments in the world. And a lot of these structures are, thankfully, still in remarkably good condition to this day. But like a lot of great civilizations, the Khmer Empire eventually began to decline. As for why, well, one possibility is that the migration of Thai people slowly encroached on Khmer territory, similar to how Germanic tribes moved into the Roman Empire. This gradual takeover may have weakened the Khmer's political influence over time. Others think that constant warfare is what did them in. Another theory is that there could have been changes in the climate that messed with their agriculture. If rainfall patterns changed, the Khmer might have struggled to maintain their farms, and mass amounts of people would have had to leave. The Nabta Playa people lived in southern Egypt around 6,000 to 11,000 years ago. They were primarily nomadic, moving around in search of food and water. Eventually, some members began to settle in the area, forming a more permanent civilization. As the climate started drying out, the region transformed into a desert, which would have sucked for them, but it did help preserve a lot of the artifacts that they left behind. One of the most famous things they left behind is the stone circle of Nabta Playa, which is the oldest known astronomical site on Earth. But along with marking the seasons, archaeologists have discovered animal remains in underground chambers, meaning that rituals may have taken place here as well. Like the other ancient civilizations on this list, the Nabta Playa people eventually disappeared. Climate change played a major role in their decline, pushing them to migrate and adapt elsewhere. And finally, the Minoan civilization lived on the Greek island of Crete from around 3000 to 1000 BC. They were a distinct culture recognized as the early ancestors of later ancient Greek society. The Minoans had pretty interesting religious lives, which included animal sacrifices, big festivals, and a number of cults celebrating nature and fertility. Egyptian hieroglyphs reference the Minoans, and from this we can determine they were active traders. They were also skilled in arts, coming up with beautiful pottery and intricate frescoes, but their civilization fell away, and one theory is that it was thanks to a volcanic eruption in the nearby Santorini Islands, which could have unleashed all these devastating tsunamis and ash clouds. Another theory comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who thought that plagues and diseases might have been the cause. But like most of the ancient civilizations on this list, we don't know exactly how they disappeared.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Anunnaki. Could the Sumerians have been touched by the cosmos? Some fringe theorists argue that these ancient people weren't born solely of Earth's lineage, but were instead visited or even genetically engineered by mysterious beings known as the Anunnaki. This narrative suggests that these otherworldly visitors brought advanced knowledge and technologies to Sumer, effectively jump-starting civilization with insights far beyond what our ancestors could have developed on their own. While mainstream historians dismiss these claims as modern myth-making, the idea that our early society might have had extraterrestrial influences continues to intrigue and unsettle scientists who fear what such a legacy could imply about the true origins of human intelligence. Next, we are talking about the suppressed advanced technology. Could ancient Sumerian technology outshine our modern gadgets? There is a tantalizing theory that the Sumerians possessed technology so advanced it seems almost futuristic. Proponents claim that they harnessed unknown forms of energy and built devices that defy the conventional timeline of human innovation, suggesting that later empires deliberately suppressed these breakthroughs to maintain power and control. Although rigorous archaeological research has yet to uncover any definitive evidence of such technologies, the possibility of a lost era of genius, one where science and art converged in ways that remain beyond our current understanding, keeps the debate alive and the curiosity of conspiracy enthusiasts burning bright. Next, we are talking about the forbidden wisdom. What if Sumerian clay tablets held a hidden code of forbidden wisdom? The ancient cuneiform inscriptions etched into clay thousands thousands of years ago are more than just records of everyday life. They might conceal cryptic prophecies and secret teachings that challenge everything we think we know about human history. Some theorists insist that these tablets are a repository of lost knowledge, containing encrypted instructions and mysteries that, if deciphered, could radically transform our understanding of civilization and our potential. Though mainstream scholars maintain that these texts simply document law, religion, and commerce, the idea of a clandestine, coded wisdom hidden in plain sight continues to captivate those eager to unlock the darker secrets of our past. Next, we are talking about the cosmic cycles and the cataclysmic prophecies. Do ancient Sumerian myths forecast a cosmic cycle of destruction and rebirth? Sumerian legends are rife with stories of cataclysmic events and divine resets that suggest a pattern of cyclical destruction followed by renewal. Some researchers interpret these myths as literal predictions, a cosmic clock ticking towards humanity's eventual collapse and then rebirth, while others see them as symbolic narratives reflecting the natural cycles of life and nature. The notion that our civilization might be subject to a recurring cosmic reset adds an eerie, almost apocalyptic dimension to the Sumerian legacy, challenging modern scientists to consider whether these ancient prophecies could hold a grain of truth about our future. Next, we are talking about the secret bloodlines and divine heritage. Could secret divine bloodlines shape our destiny? A controversial theory holds that the Sumerian gods did more than simply inspire myth. They might have left behind tangible genetic legacies in select bloodlines that continue to influence world events today. Advocates of this idea suggest that these divine markers, hidden within the lineage of certain elites, have been the secret engine behind historical power shifts and cultural evolution. Mainstream academia largely dismisses this as a misinterpretation of allegory and symbolism, but the allure of possessing a direct connection to the divine remains irresistible to those who ponder whether our own family trees might hide a spark of celestial intervention. Next, we are talking about the lost energy source. What if the Sumerians unlocked an energy source lost to time? There is a daring theory that the Sumerians tapped into a form of energy that modern science has yet to fully comprehend, often described in hushed tones as cosmic or even zero-point energy. This hypothesis points to their extraordinary achievements in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture as possible evidence that they harnessed an otherworldly power to fuel their civilization. While tangible proof remains elusive, the idea that our ancestors might have accessed an energy source that has since been deliberately obscured or forgotten adds an electrifying layer of mystery to their remarkable legacy, leaving scientists to wonder what truths lie hidden beneath the sands of time. Next, we are talking about erased histories. What if someone deliberately erased our true origins? A shadowy narrative suggests that later civilizations conspired to destroy or hide crucial Sumerian records, effectively censoring the truth about humanity's early achievements and our cosmic origins. According to this theory, the deliberate loss of priceless tablets and artifacts wasn't mere accident, but a calculated effort to rewrite history and maintain power over the masses. Although archaeological findings confirm that many relics have vanished due to time, conflict, or natural decay, the possibility of an organized cover-up continues to fuel conspiracy theories and leaves a lingering question: are we missing vital clues about the true story of our beginnings? Next, we are talking about the Sumerian deities. Could the Sumerian gods be more than just mere myth? Beyond the dramatic tales of alien visitors and suppressed technology, there's an intriguing idea that the Sumerian deities were not simply fictional characters, but may have represented actual forces of nature or even advanced beings in their own right. This perspective challenges traditional religious interpretations by suggesting that these gods were sophisticated personifications of natural phenomena. embodiments of the elements and cosmic principles that early humans struggled to understand. The debate over their true nature not only deepens the mystery of Sumerian spirituality, but also blurs the line between myth and reality, inviting both scholars and skeptics to question the origins of divine power. Next, we are talking about the blueprint for a lost civilization. Did the Sumerians design a secret blueprint for an ideal society? One of the most compelling theories holds that Sumer wasn't just the cradle of civilization, but also the mastermind behind a detailed blueprint for a perfect society. This idea contends that the Sumerians devised advanced laws, urban planning strategies, and engineering innovations so revolutionary that they were later suppressed by dominant empires to keep this knowledge from ever reaching the masses. Enthusiasts of this theory argue that hidden within the ruins and tablets lies a sophisticated roadmap for creating a just, efficient society, one that could, if rediscovered, transform modern governance and culture. Even without concrete evidence, the allure of a lost civilization's master plan continues to spark debate and ignite the imagination of those who dare to dream of a better world. And finally, on our list today, we are talking about the ancient cosmic order. Could ancient Sumerian myths be echoes of a forgotten cosmic order? Some researchers propose that the intricate and rich tapestry of Sumerian mythology is more than just mere folklore. It might be a repository of ancient cosmic knowledge, a cultural memory of primordial order that governed the universe long before modern science took hold. These myths, packed with symbolic imagery and profound insights into the nature of reality, suggest that the Sumerians may have tapped into an understanding of the cosmos that challenges the very foundations of contemporary physics and cosmology. While this theory remains speculative, it invites us to reconsider our place in the universe and to wonder whether the ancient Sumerians held secrets so powerful that they still cause a stir among scientists who fear the implications of rediscovering such lost wisdom.
The Nabateans were an ancient civilization that lived in the deserts of what is now Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. They're probably most well known for creating the stunning city of Petra, which really has to be one of the coolest places on Earth. They were, as you can probably tell, really good at architecture. Petra, often called the Rose City, is carved into the sides of sandstone cliffs, and it's one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world, for very good reason. They weren't just about building them, they were also incredible at surviving in harsh desert conditions. They developed advanced water management systems like dams, cisterns, and channels to capture and store rainwater in the dry desert. This allowed them to live in a place that most other civilizations would have struggled to survive in. They were also skilled traders, controlling trade routes that connected Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. They traded spices, incense, and other goods, which made them incredibly wealthy. Their success was partly due to their ability to adapt to the desert environment and make use of its resources in smart ways. They didn't leave behind written records, but they did leave behind structures and tons of artwork that has helped us piece together what their culture was probably like. The ancestral Puebloans, also known as the Anasazi, were a Native American civilization that lived in the southwestern United States, mainly in what's now Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. They're known for having built cliff dwellings and pueblos in the desert, especially in places like Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. Their homes were often carved right into the sides of cliffs, giving them protection from the harsh desert environment. They were also skilled architects and farmers. They lived in a dry desert, but they developed impressive irrigation systems to grow crops like corn, beans, and squash, and they also built large multi-story buildings, creating entire communities that could house hundreds of people. Their most famous site, Chaco Canyon, was a major center for culture and trade. It had grand ceremonial structures, large plazas, and roads leading in all different directions, almost like an ancient highway system of the desert. The Puebloans were also known for their intricate pottery, woven textiles, and beautiful rock art. Their culture was deeply connected to the land, with religious ceremonies tied to the cycles of nature, but By the late 1200s, they just mysteriously abandoned their cliff dwellings, and there's still some debate as to why. The Sumerians were one of the earliest known civilizations, and they lived in the deserts of Mesopotamia and what's now southern Iraq. They came about around 3500 BCE and are often credited with creating the first cities. The land they lived on was mostly dry and flat, but the Tigris and Euphrates rivers gave them the water they needed to survive. The Sumerians were also famous for developing one of the first writing systems, cuneiform. They used wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets to create everything from business transactions to religious stories, and this allowed them to keep records and pass on knowledge across generations. The Sumerians were also skilled builders, engineers, and farmers. They created irrigation systems to water their crops, which helped them turn the desert into fertile land. And they also built impressive structures like ziggurats, which are these huge stepped pyramids that were used for religious ceremonies. Their cities like Ur and Uruk were bustling with activity with markets, temples, and palaces. The Sumerians also made huge advances in math, science, and law, but then they disappeared, and their cities were buried under layers of sand until being rediscovered in the 19th century. The Hohokam were an ancient civilization that lived in the deserts of the American Southwest, mainly in what is now Arizona, from around 300 to 1500 CE. Now, the Hohokam, that's not what they were actually called, but that's what archaeologists have named them. They're best known for their canal systems. They took advantage of the little water they had, creating hundreds of miles of irrigation canals that helped them grow crops like corn, beans, and squash in the desert. Canals were so advanced that some of them are still visible to this day, and they used the flow of water from rivers like the Salt River to channel water to their fields, and this allowed them to support large communities, even in a desert where water is obviously scarce. They lived in these large planned settlements with houses made of adobe and wood. They built platform mounds for religious ceremonies, and they were skilled in pottery, creating intricate designs that have been rediscovered by archaeologists. But like so many other civilizations on this list, the Hohokam mysteriously disappeared around 1500 CE. The Minoans are one of the coolest lost civilizations, said by some to be the first civilization in Europe. They lived on the island of Crete in the Mediterranean around 2000 BCE. Their story is pretty fascinating because, again, they mysteriously vanished and their civilization wasn't rediscovered until the 20th century. They were advanced with their own writing system, artwork, and all these impressive palaces. The biggest one, Palace of Knossos, or what's left of it, looks like something out of a myth. I can only imagine how incredible it must have looked when it was all still there. The Minoans were traders, sailing all over the Mediterranean, which helped them spread their culture and influence. And around 1450 BCE, the Minoans faded away. Some believe a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera caused it. Could have also been invasions, but it wasn't until the early 1900s that archaeologists started uncovering the remains of their cities and palaces, piecing together their society. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, is one of the most impressive ancient cultures rediscovered in the desert. This civilization lived over 4,000 years ago in what's now Pakistan and northwest India, in the desert regions near the Indus River. They were incredibly advanced, with well-planned cities, drainage systems, and standardized brick sizes. They were very organized. Their two main cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, were massive, with streets laid out in neat grids. They also had sophisticated water management systems with public baths and wells, but even though we have all this evidence left behind from them, we still don't know how to read their writing system, which means we can only guess about their language and the reason for their sudden collapse around 1900 BCE. In the early 20th century, archaeologists discovered the ruins of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro buried beneath layers of earth, and today we know they were an incredibly advanced society, but there's still a lot of mystery about their culture. Next up, we have the Napta Stones, which are a series of old structures in the Nubian desert. They're around 6,000 to 7,000 years old. They were discovered by a team of archaeologists led by Fred Wendorf in the 70s. The stones are flat rocks and big stones set up in a circular formation. Some are hefty, weighing tons. Now, what these stones were actually for is still a bit of a mystery. Some think they might have been an early form of a calendar, though, and they also line up with astronomical events, which tells us that the ancient builders knew their astronomy, doing some incredibly precise measuring for the time. But we're still not sure about who set these things up. Jado is an abandoned ghost town in Niger, deep in the Sahara Desert. Found on the Jado Plateau, the ancient settlement's true name is still a mystery because no formal excavation has ever been carried out. The ruins sit on top of cliffs, and below them, hidden ponds that almost dry up in certain seasons, perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. Jado was most likely founded by the Sao people, who were known for setting up other settlements around Lake Chad. It seems like at one time there was a bustling city here, and some think it could have been part of the Kanem-Bornu Empire from as early as the 13th century. By the 19th century, though, repeated raids by the Tuareg and the spread of malaria from cattle herding pushed people out. By the mid-20th century, only a handful of people remained, relying on date farming and salt harvesting. In 1930, during French colonial rule, a military outpost was set up nearby. Jado stayed relatively quiet until 2014 when gold was discovered in the area, so then there was a rush, attracting thousands of miners from across North Africa, but mining operations were shut down in 2017. The Norte Chico civilization is one of the most mysterious ancient societies in the Americas, located in what is now Peru. Dating back to around 3000 BCE, it might be the oldest known civilization in the Americas. The ruins have revealed some amazing finds, mainly huge pyramids and intricate irrigation systems. There's still a lot we don't know about how people actually lived though. So far, 6 pyramids have been discovered, with the biggest one being Pyramide Mayor. Now, these structures aren't as flashy as later Inca pyramids, but they're still impressive and interesting because we just know so little about the people who built them. The Norte Chico people didn't make pottery either, which is kind of unusual for ancient civilizations. Instead, they're thought to have used gourds, which of course don't last for thousands and thousands of years. There's not much art or decoration either, but it's believed they had some kind of belief in a higher power, though what exactly they worshipped is still unknown. The civilization seemed to be centered around 3 main rivers, and by 1800 BCE, the settlements were mysteriously abandoned. Well, if we're talking about incredible ancient civilizations in deserts, we can't not talk about the ancient Egyptians, right? They lived along the Nile River, but the surrounding desert played a huge role in shaping their culture. This civilization started around 3100 BCE and is known for their incredible and mysterious monuments like the pyramids and the Sphinx. The Egyptians were absolutely brilliant when it came to architecture, engineering, astronomy. They were so advanced that we're still trying to figure out how they did it all. They built massive stone structures, and their understanding of the stars helped them create a pretty accurate calendar. And the Egyptians also had just a rich culture with art, writing, religion, mummies. They created hieroglyphics, one of the earliest forms of writing, to record everything from royal orders to daily life. Their gods and goddesses like Ra, the sun god, were a huge part of their rituals and beliefs. For centuries, the desert kept their secrets hidden, but over time, archaeologists started digging up tombs, walking into these incredible temples, and finding all sorts of artifacts that we're still amazed by to this day. And even with all we've learned about the ancient Egyptians, there are still plenty of mysteries, still unexplored areas of the pyramids, and still questions and conspiracies about their technology. Well, exciting news, everyone. A story about the discovery of a long-lost city in the Amazon just came out this year. Scientists have uncovered a massive ancient city hidden deep in the Amazon rainforest in the Apano area of eastern Ecuador. This place was buried under thick vegetation for thousands of years. For ages, we thought the Amazon was home to small nomadic groups or tiny villages, but this city proves that sophisticated urban societies once existed there. Professor Stephen Rothstein, who led the research, said, "This is older than any other site we know in the Amazon. We have a Eurocentric view of civilization, but this shows we have to change our idea about what is culture and civilization." The researchers used this super cool LiDAR technology, which is basically a high-tech method of scanning the ground from above, and discovered around 6,000 rectangular platforms and a network of roads and canals. One of the platforms measures 450 59 by 131 feet. What's also wild is that this society seemed to have been even bigger than the famous Maya civilizations in Central America. Jose Ariarte, an archaeology professor, stated, "Imagine that you discovered another civilization like the Maya, but with completely different architecture, land use, and ceramics." I mean, how cool is that? This discovery challenges everything we thought we knew about the Amazon. Professor Rothstein had apparently been warned against doing the research because many believed that no ancient groups like this lived in the Amazon, but in his own words, he was just stubborn enough to go ahead and do it anyway. They're planning to explore an adjoining area just as big, so who knows what else will be revealed in the very near future. Angkor Wat is an ancient Hindu-Buddhist temple complex found in Cambodia. Guinness World Records lists it as the largest religious structure in the entire world, so it's quite the sight. It was mostly neglected after the 16th century and wasn't known to the Western world until about 1860, when a French explorer named Henri Marot popularized it in Europe with his travel notes, writing, "One of these temples, a rival to that of Solomon, and erected by some ancient Michelangelo, might take an honorable place beside our most beautiful buildings. It is grander than anything left to us by Greece or Rome." High praise, but then he went on to describe the locals as savages, so that kind of ruins it. Angkor Wat is pretty spectacular, but it's all that's left of what used to be a much larger city. Some say it was even bigger than modern-day New York. Now, in terms of the size of the area it covered, I'm not talking about population. At its peak, Angkor was likely home to hundreds of thousands of people, though, making it one of the largest urban centers in the world at the time. The city had an advanced irrigation system with canals and reservoirs, but over time the soil started to deplete, affecting crops and food production. Some researchers also believe droughts could have hit the region, and by the 15th century the city itself had mostly been left behind, but the temple complex of Angkor Wat was never completely abandoned. Derinkuyu is quite literally buried. It's an ancient underground city in Turkey that likely started being built around the 8th to 7th century BCE, but it wasn't fully formed until about 780 to 1180 CE, when it was used as a refuge during the Arab-Byzantine Wars, giving people shelter and protection against invasions. It's about 280 feet deep and can shelter around 20,000 people, along with their livestock and food supplies. It's an insanely cool multiple level complex with large stone doors used to close off each floor separately, offering protection from the threats from above. It was built with wine and oil presses, stables, storage rooms, and even chapels. One room was believed to have been used as a religious school, with nearby spaces acting as studies. One of the coolest features is the deep ventilation shaft, which also worked as a well, so that the people living underground could have access to water. Derinkuyu continued being used over the centuries during various invasions, but eventually it was forgotten and lay hidden for years until a homeowner discovered it entirely by accident while renovating in 1963. They'd chased a chicken that ran into a hole in their basement only to find an entire network of underground tunnels. By 1969, parts of it were opened to the public, and today you can explore about half of this subterranean city. The Italian hilltop town of Orvieto has an entire network of underground tunnels that were kept secret for centuries. The underground city dates back to the ancient Etruscans. These early inhabitants started carving out tunnels in the volcanic rock to create wells and cisterns, and over time it evolved into a massive subterranean maze with over 1,200 interconnected tunnels and grottos. Some of the chambers contain remnants of Etruscan sanctuaries where ancient rituals took place, but these tunnels were used up until World War II and in every era in between. It was used for storage and refuge during tough times in the Roman era, the Middle Ages, and again, most recently, World War II, where parts of the underground network were used as bomb shelters. Again, the tunnels were kept secret for a long time, only made known to outsiders in recent years. Next up, we have the Özkonak underground city, again in Turkey. It's a network of tunnels carved into volcanic granite, connecting larger areas, and even has a pipe communication system that links all the different levels. It was rediscovered in 1972 by a farmer named Latif Akar, who was curious as to where all his excess water was going. He decided to investigate himself and ended up coming across this underground room. And then it was excavated, and it turned out to be a giant city that could house up to 60,000 people. Today, 4 floors of it are open to the public, but there are a total of 10 floors, reaching a depth of about 131 feet. Oskanak was built with some pretty interesting defensive capabilities too. Holes were built above the tunnels so that defenders could dump hot sand on intruders. Seems like nobody does underground cities better than Turkey, because we have another one on the list. Kaymakli. This site was first opened to tourists in 1964, and it's believed to have been built in the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, carved out of soft volcanic rock. As time went on, especially during the Byzantine era, the city expanded significantly to protect its inhabitants from raids. Kaymakli is actually connected to Derinkuyu through a network of tunnels spanning over 5.5 miles. And today, some of these tunnels are still used for storage, stables, and cellars. The tunnels are a bit different from the ones in Derinkuyu. They are lower, narrower, and more steeply inclined. The 4 floors open to visitors are designed around ventilation shafts, which were of course very important for survival underground. On the first floor, you'll find a stable and a stone door leading to a church. Lower down, you'll find a church, storage areas, kitchens, and block formations that were used for cold copper processing. Let's talk about Thonis, an ancient city that's now submerged beneath the Mediterranean Sea. This Egyptian port city was located near the mouth of the Nile River and was once a hub for trade, especially with Greece and other Mediterranean regions. Thonis was very important in ancient Egypt's economy and was filled with these grand temples and statues dedicated to gods and goddesses, but then it sank beneath the sea, and for centuries it was lost and forgotten, until it was rediscovered by underwater archaeologists in 2000. And along with the remnants of the city itself, divers found these remarkably well-preserved artifacts like statues and pottery. Aktun Tonikil Mcnal, or ATM for short, is an incredible cave in Belize full of ancient Maya history. Ceramics, fascinating stoneware, and a famous skeleton have all been found here, and more. The famous skeleton in question is known as the Crystal Maiden, believed to be that of a 17-year-old boy. His bones have calcified over time, giving them a sparkling, crystallized look. Hence the name. A lot of the ceramics found here have what are called kill holes, which were made to release spirits, meaning this cave was probably used for ceremonial practices. The cave is just stunning, the type of thing you'd see in an Indiana Jones movie. You'll also have a variety of wildlife here. Bats, crabs, tropical fish, otters can go here, but not on your own. Tourism is carefully managed, so you can explore it with a tour guide. Makes sense, they want to make sure the place is preserved. Plus, it can be pretty dangerous. The main cave system stretches about 3 miles long, with sections that can get pretty tight. And during heavy rain, the river level rises, in which case it's completely closed off to tourists. Now we head over to Poland to check out Wieliczka salt mine. This mine has been in use in some form since the Neolithic times, with salt production starting as early as 1044. Excavation officially began in the 13th century, and the mine kept producing table salt until 1996, making it one of the oldest salt mines in the world. The maze of tunnels stretches over 178 miles and reaches depths of about 1,073 feet deep. You can visit the place today, and it's not just a mine. There's some incredible stuff to see. There's an underground lake and chapel, and tons of beautiful sculptures, all carved out of salt. Based on the images I've seen online, the place looks like something you'd see in a sword and sorcery movie. It's amazing. During World War II, the mine was repurposed by the Germans for war-related manufacturing, with forced laborers brought in to work underground. Nauers is a charming little village in northern France, home to about 1,200 people, but just a short walk away, there's an ancient underground city that once housed around 3 times that number of people. The caves were hand-carved during the Middle Ages and stretch about 2 miles with over 300 rooms. The underground was built for villagers seeking shelter from invasions. It was made so that people could stay down there for long stretches of time. They built areas for livestock and water wells, and there were areas for people to gather and hang out. And here's a really cool thing about this underground city: there were bakeries. To keep the smoke from the ovens hidden, too, the chimneys were routed through the houses above. So while the villagers baked bread down below, the invaders above would think people were still in their homes. and then would be very confused when they broke inside and saw that there was nobody there. The caves remained a secret until 1887, when they were rediscovered, and soldiers during both world wars took refuge here. In fact, you can still see graffiti and carvings left behind by Australian and British troops.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the advanced civilization. There's a claim that might keep you up at night. During Joe Rogan's conversation with Graham Hancock, the two discussed the idea of a civilization so old it dates back to the last ice age. Graham says bluntly, a major advanced civilization existed more than 12,000 years ago. That puts us in a timeline that shatters the usual textbook story, which insists major civilizations only popped up a few thousand years before Christ. The conversation references the Younger Dryas impact theory, more on that later, suggesting multiple comet fragments slammed into Earth around 12,800 years ago. If that really happened, entire cultures might have been wiped out, leaving behind only scattered hints like mysterious megalithic sites. Some archaeologists, like one featured in the same episode, Flint Dibble, are deeply skeptical, but as Hancock puts it, we have forgotten an episode of the human story, and he wants to find out exactly which chapter was torn from the record. Next, we are talking about Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe gets thrown into the spotlight for fueling suspicions of an ancient apocalypse. On the Joe Rogan Experience, Graham Hancock points to this 11,600-year-old site in southeastern Turkey as the smoking gun. He describes stone pillars weighing tons that were arranged at a time conventional wisdom labels a simple hunter-gatherer era. If these were just tiny bands of nomads, how did they manage such advanced stonework? Hancock hints it's evidence they inherited skills from a lost society. In the episode, there's talk about a lost civilization that existed well before recognized ancient cultures, and Göbekli Tepe becomes the prime suspect, challenging folks who assume civilization just started out of nowhere in places like Sumer. Next up, we are talking about the Sphinx secret. The Sphinx might be holding an age-old secret that rewrites everything about ancient Egypt. Hancock references a geologist's rain weathering argument, saying that there's heavy rain weathering on the Sphinx enclosure, which could make it 9,000 or even 10,000 years old, way beyond the Old Kingdom's timeline. What sets chills down your spine is Hancock's suggestion that the Sphinx may have aligned with the constellation Leo around 12,000 plus years ago. I don't think anyone knows how they did it, Rogan remarks, referring to those incredible monuments. The episode quotes an archaeologist, Flint Dibble, who dismisses these claims, but the conflict remains. If that sculpture really is thousands of years older than standard history says, are we missing an entire layer of advanced Egyptian prehistory? Next up, we are talking about Atlantis. Atlantis is more than just a myth, if you ask this crowd. In the episodes, Hancock emphasizes that Plato got the story from Egyptian priests who apparently told Solon about a massive flood destroying a powerful civilization. So maybe it's not just some Greek philosopher's fantasy. Joe Rogan and guests compare these tales to global flood myths, cultural memories of real cataclysms. We've had so many of these flood traditions, Hancock points out, hinting that they all might be referencing the same meltdown at the end of the Ice Age. The terrifying thought is that a sophisticated empire was wiped off the map, leaving behind only the vaguest legends about a sunken land. Next, we are talking about the Olmec colossal heads. Olmec heads spark talk of ancient connections across the seas. On Rogan's podcast, Hancock mentions those colossal stone heads in Mexico, dated around 1000 BC, but sporting features nobody can fully explain. Could there have been transoceanic voyages long before Columbus? These legends aren't just made up, Hancock insists, suggesting older influences might have seeded knowledge in places like Mesoamerica. Critics fire back, saying mainstream archaeology sees no proof of major sea travel back then, yet the notion that some bearded teachers popped up in the New World keeps fueling theories of a shared prehistoric culture. Next, we are talking about the stone spheres in Costa Rica. The stone spheres in Costa Rica get a nod as another unsolved puzzle. Hancock references these perfectly round boulders, some bigger than a car, that mainstream scholars date to around 2500 to 1500 CE. Yet he argues no one really knows their age because stone is notoriously hard to pin down. Joe Rogan calls them a total mystery, and the speculation ramps up. Did they come from a pre-flood society with advanced tools, or are they just the result of local artisans? The episode captures that sense of awe, with Hancock insisting they could be leftovers of an earlier epoch that we haven't even considered yet. Next, we are talking about the missing history. An overarching claim that hits hard is the idea that we missed an entire episode of humanity's saga. We've forgotten an episode of human history, Hancock says, laying out how megalithic structures, possibly comet impacts, and swirling legends all converge on a single conclusion. Some primal civilization thrived in the late Ice Age, then vanished under violent cataclysms. Joe Rogan, clearly fascinated, hammers on the point that mainstream archaeology might not be completely wrong, but could have huge blind spots. This tension sets the stage for a more sinister question. If advanced societies got obliterated once, could it happen again? In our number 3 spot today, we are talking about the Younger Dryas impact theory. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis demands attention as one of those topics from Rogan's interviews that sounds like it's sci-fi, but might be rooted in actual, real science. Graham Hancock aligns with the researchers finding nanodiamonds, platinum anomalies, and other cosmic markers suggesting that Earth got hammered by comet fragments 12,800 years ago. Flint, the archaeologist, fires back that recent papers refute a large-scale impact, but Hancock is not convinced. He references Randall Carlson's work, impact proxies spanning large swaths, implying that if the event was catastrophic, entire cultures would have been vaporized. That angle might explain the near-total absence of direct evidence for such an advanced Ice Age civilization. Next up, we are talking about Gunung Padang. This place in Indonesia enters the ring as a bizarre hillside that some suspect might contain layers from 20,000 years ago. On one podcast episode, Hancock describes it as a possible pyramid hidden under centuries of soil and vegetation. Skeptics, including some from the episode, Flint Dibble, say deeper scans are misread or that it's just natural formations, but supporters retort that a lost civilization, as Hancock phrases it, could have built the lower terraces well before mainstream timelines. If the site truly goes back that far, it might be physical proof that people had complex building techniques when woolly mammoths were still roaming around. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Eye of the Sahara. The Eye of the Sahara caps off this wild list by being pitched as the literal site of Atlantis. During that Mauritania-themed discussion, both speakers compare the geological and historical details to Plato's words about concentric rings of land and water, matching stone colors red, black, and white, and other features described by Plato make the location eerily on point. Rogan's show even dives into how catastrophic flooding, possibly tied to the Younger Dryas meltdown, could have obliterated that city. Perhaps the creepiest angle is that Egyptian records might have referenced this exact place, meaning the biggest archaeological smoking gun in history could be sitting in plain sight in the Sahara.